or I cut out at the
Uh, yeah, so his talk is called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Learning How to Get It Right.
Oh, learning how to get it right. Got it. That's
Okay.
what I missed.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen and then we can get started.
Diversity, equity, inclusion, a topic that we've heard so much about in the last couple of years, an area that we see so much investment in. Every organization trying to drive change, trying to create a workplace that's more inclusive, a society that's more inclusive. In the US alone, last year, $8 billion was spent on diversity training, and many more billions globally to try to create that equity that everyone wants to see, feel in the workplace. However, one of the things that's come to light is that it's not driving the change that we want to see. We're not achieving the success that people want to feel in the workplace. Why is that? Well, I argue that very training is biased. It's built with stereotypes. It has assumptions. It's not always diverse or inclusive. And many times, it does the very opposite of inclusion. But in order to truly understand why diversity training is failing and what we can do to really drive change, we must look at education as a whole. How do we learn? I remember being in university. I did a degree in business management. And at the time, we did numerous case studies, read numerous books about successful leaders. What makes success? Who are the top leaders in our country? Who are the top leaders globally? And I remember looking at them and reading these books and thinking, not one of them. And how can I become something I can't see was the big thing for me. When I graduated, I really struggled with seeing myself in that position. Fortunately, life gave me experiences that made me believe that I could be anything I wanted. But that education failed me because it didn't give me that image. When we think about history that we learned in school, whether primary school, secondary school, what history did we learn? If we learned about the British Empire, did you learn about the colonizer or the colonized? Which version did you get? Was it bias-free? Did it really give you all the different perspectives? These are the challenges we see in so many forms of education. They give you a perspective, not the whole perspective, not different views, not different takes. When we think of education, many times it's delivered in a certain way to what is defined as a group. We deliver it in the same way. Everyone learns the same way. Everyone absorbs information the same way. That's so far from the truth. We know people learn in different ways. We know people are neurodiverse. People have different ways of taking in information. I've got a young son, a 7-year-old, who's got ADHD. And I got called in to his school a couple of weeks back. And the teacher said to me that he's not doing well. He's not able to do tasks he's given. We give him maths questions and he doesn't do them. He fails. His education standards are much lower than they should be. My son, who's 7, builds Legos for 14-plus-year-olds. He has this brain. He can do things I couldn't even imagine to do at his age. And I said to his teacher that if you want him to learn, you have to adapt your style, not him adapt himself to fit in. Why not give him those 10 math sums and break them down? Give him 2 at a time. Let him complete 2, tell him he's done a great 2. Because that's how he learns. That's how he can be successful when learning. So we must readdress how we teach, how we get people to understand different things if we're truly going to embed change. And then when we think of diversity training or diversity education, it's many different elements that are not having the success that we want to see. Let me give you some examples. When we learn about diversity, what do we see? Usually, we have a poster up with a person. That's someone who's a person of color. That's someone who's a member of the LGBTQ plus community. Really? The one person or one image describes what is the view of Muslims on something being someone of faith. And I was like, wow, you want me to give you a view of almost 2 billion people? Me. How can I do that? Everyone's an individual. Everyone has a unique identity. But if we're going to stereotype and say, this is that group, we're not going to achieve success. Furthermore, a lot of our training within the diversity space looks at some of the challenges faced by communities, and rightly so, there are challenges. When we think about racial equity, when we think about gender equity and so on, there's huge challenges. However, it's not all misery. There's so many successes in diverse communities and diverse groups and underrepresented groups. Why do we not hear about them? I remember speaking at an event a couple of months back, and someone came up to me at the end and said, it's amazing to see everything you've achieved despite all odds. And I was like, wow, thank you, but what do you mean by all odds? And she said to me, it must have been really difficult for you growing up. It must have been so difficult not having access to opportunities. And I was like, I'm really sorry, but I had a really good upbringing, not the one that you think I had. And she apologized, and she didn't have any negative intent. Her intent was not negative. But the problem was, someone had taught her through some training somewhere that people who look like me, this is their experiences, or this is their journey. So it hadn't built in the unique identities within that training. The other big challenge when we think about diversity training is, what perspectives do we give? What do I mean by that? We give dominant culture perspectives. Many trainings around the space are either a British version or a US version, with the assumption that that same diversity elements that we focus on will work in every single country globally. Diversity is different. What areas of diversity are important, what diversity looks like, is different in each and every country. Forget countries, in each and every town. And not even towns, in each and every region within that town, each and every estate, each and every block within that town, it's different. But if we give one version and expect everyone to understand that, how will that actually reach out and speak to the people? How will it train individuals to engage with each other? Many trainings in the diversity space are done through the corporate space. You're given one version, right? So what a company believes in. These are our top 5, top 10, top 3 areas of diversity. We believe in this. How can we learn if we don't have more information? If we don't have different perspectives within that diversity training? So what is the solution? Well, I think it's a few things. The first is our source of information. We cannot train with one source. We must look at open source information. Why can diversity training not be about all the different views on a topic? We don't have to give one perspective. Our society right now is so divided. There is no middle left. You're either very far left or very far right, and we don't speak to each other. But how are we going to truly change and embed that change unless we look at the differences, we look at the differences we have. Lead on the same things, that wouldn't be diverse. Diversity is about bringing different perspectives, different lived experiences together, and respecting our differences, and then working towards better goals. So we must diversify the very content we teach and the very content we put in for people to learn. We must localize it. diversity training shouldn't be training that's designed centrally. We need to let teams and individuals speak about what it means. Storytelling, we learn through stories. So if we have diversity training that gets a group of colleagues together and they share their experiences, that's impactful. We learn through each other, human interaction, the biggest learning we can have. The other big thing is we need to move away from just one form of learning or education when it comes to diversity. Traditional classroom-based learning has a part to play, it's good, but we must think about experiential learning. How do we create experiences that truly drive change? If I asked any of you to speak or to remember a time that you were taught something in a classroom, you could probably go back a few years, maybe even a few weeks. But if I asked you about an experience, you could probably go back to your early childhood. We remember experiences. Usually uncomfortable experiences stay with us for a lifetime, but we do remember experiences. Experiences are, it's how we learn. So if we're going to teach people about diversity, let them have experiences. And we must diversify our experiences, not just in our workplace or in our schools, but beyond that. If I asked any of you to write down your 5 closest friends, how different are they to you? You'll find they're very similar. So unless we diversify our experiences outside of our workplace, our studying environment, we're not going to learn. We're creatures of habit. I go to the same restaurants. I sit in the same chair in the restaurant, but that's not going to teach me anything. I must try different experiences, even if they're uncomfortable, because that's how we truly will drive change in the diversity space. Group learning, so powerful. As groups, how can we learn? How can we come together and share those different ideas? How do we create psychologically safe environments? As I mentioned, there's so much fear of saying the wrong one, not knowing the right terminology to use when it comes to diversity. That can't help if we're not talking. How will we learn? How do we create psychological safety to come together and have those difficult conversations? Ask someone that, look, I don't know what the right phrase is, or I would like to know more about this, and we share. I have never been offended by someone asking me a question, but I have been offended by someone making an assumption about what my needs are. So ask me, ask what I would like. And then self-led learning. Learning is our own responsibility. We must learn, whether it's through traditional forms of learning or whether it's through experiential learning. We can own that journey of learning. It is not the responsibility of anyone to educate anyone. We can champion that learning. Many times over the last couple of years, I've heard people from underrepresented groups saying that people have come up to them and said, tell me about this, teach me about that. Not everyone wants to share their experiences. And it is not the burden of an underrepresented group to educate someone else. Yes, we should talk, and yes, we should have conversations, but that responsibility lies with us. We are the people who own our own journey of learning. And it is uncomfortable. I don't want to lie to any of you and say diversity or the topics around diversity are not uncomfortable. They are, but we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable, because we're not going to make progress unless we truly understand what that looks like. And finally, when we think about learning in the diversity space, it's not a 2-hour module. It's not a half-day program. It's a lifelong journey. Within the workplace, statistically and evidence shows half-day programs, the 1-hour workshops do not change behavior. People revert back. How many times have you seen learning or training being delivered and people are sitting on their phones? People have switched off. For learning to be impactful, it has to be continuous. We learn through continuously practicing something, through continuously leading something and really owning it. That's how we learn. And learning is not for a select group of people when it comes to diversity. Diversity education is for everyone. It's not a them game. We don't place a particular group through the education and not another group. Biases exist everywhere. Microaggressions, discrimination, stereotypes. But we must all own that journey. We must all go on it. And it will be a long-term journey. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is here to stay. It is not only a nice thing to do, but it's a business imperative. When you look at how businesses are successful, it is through diversity and inclusion. Future generations will not align themselves to an organization that doesn't value diversity and inclusion. So getting this education piece right is critical for the success of any institution or any organization. But it is something that we must readdress, because if we continue down the same path and spend the billions without any impact, we're just box ticking. So true change is going beyond the boxes and really understanding that each and every individual is part of the change. We should all own that journey of going through the change. Thank you.
Okay, so what did people think about that? Jane, you seem to be very intently listening and thinking about it, or thinking about something.
No, I agreed with them. I've always agreed that, you know, like anything that's too controlled by the well, with the teacher or the facilitator or ever or whatever they're doing, it needs to be really, like he said, a conversation where trust builds, and then you know, people can sort of start to bring up what really matters to them. But they got to figure out how to build the trust first, right? If it's a really diverse group. If it's a little small group like this, we know each other, we can we can probably skip a few steps. But yeah, it was interesting, and I liked his perspective, because it's you know, you tend to sort of think diversity has to be really it's sort of a white European or American thing, but it's everybody, because everybody brings their own biases. My bias is when they pop out, because they always pop out eventually, because you're unaware of them. I mean, that's why they're, you know, hidden or unconscious biases.
Well,
it's like when it does happen, it's like, oh my God, you know, like it's a total surprise, but then it makes me laugh, because you realize we're all the same. We all have them. And it isn't just about race and thing. I mean, a lot of them are class or just, you know, just
Ability.
the way you view how our society's structured, all kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that I really liked about the way he talked about things was just the very, very frankness of how much training. Well, one, I mean, you know, he starts off with the $8 billion number of going into training, and I do not doubt that at all. But how it's box checking on so many levels, because people do not follow through. They do not understand the commitment that is needed to follow through. Much like, you know, today, you know, I expected more folks to join, and people don't take the time for it. They don't recognize that if they don't take the time for it and make it a process in their life, they're not actually ever going to get over that pinnacle of really starting to understand their place in a very complex society. And then organizations. I mean, how many of our organizations, like John working for the city and you know, school boards or even arts spaces, how many of them think that they need to do this work? You know, oh, I put Black actors and musicians on my stage all the time, so yeah, we're a diverse organization. You know,
And what I worry about is we're now going into a period where we're going to have to resist the backlash and strongly resist it.
what do you mean by that, Jane?
Well, that whole right-wing agenda that's creeping all over the place.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask the group, Jane. Actually, you just started the question for me, because there's been a lot in the news about defunding a lot of DEI programs at universities and larger organizations, more so in the States than in Canada. But quite often what starts in the States filters elsewhere. So I was wondering what your thoughts on that to the group.
Any of us?
Yeah,
Anyone?
I'll just add, like, I'm not seeing a ton of that here in Ottawa, but I am seeing like a lot of box checking, right? There's a lot of talk and not a lot of action often when it comes to this work. So I'll just say that for now, but I want to bring up something specific, but I want to change the subject quite yet.
Yeah, I mean, I am fearful for sure, because there will be a financial funding shift for sure if we go blue. You know, the province of Ontario is the perfect example for that. That's already started to happen and been happening. How much will they get away with? I'm more curious to know. I mean, it's much like things being put through that will not allow them to change. Like, the one thing about our government system versus the American system is that we can actually entrench things that they're not easy to take out of a policy or you know, a bylaw or a procedure or whatever. Unlike the States, they can, you know, president can veto whatever he wants. And so I'm more curious to know what things that the Liberals have secured over their 8 years it becomes entrenched enough that any other future government can't back roll on. Because there are some of those things that have happened that we were safe on in minimums, but certainly overall it's not going to be great. And hence the solidarity of working, you know, and networking and learning from each other and figuring out how to work closer together, I think it needs to become really important amongst everyone in the arts sector. I mean, the presenters, you know, all the presenters need to work closer together. I mean, it's a shame more people don't join something like block booking, for instance, because that is going to be the saving grace, I think, as we start to lose money and the sector starts to lose money. You need to be able to network with stronger allies to do the work you want to do. And that can be said, I think, for galleries, you know, just any spatial opportunity for showcasing or exhibition. I think it really needs to get off the high horse of siloism and realize that if they aren't part of a network, eventually, you know, things will be lost. And this is where we need to break down that barrier between us and them with things like Stratford and Shaw and the NEC. You know, we need to have some very frank conversations with those folks and those boards to say, how are you working with the rest of the sector at a time when it's going to become very desperate in general? my thoughts.
Can I just add something?
Of course.
This TED Talk is well timed, and I'll share it out with my staff because we're about to start engaging with some specific training around South Asian culture in my team, because it's clear that we're doing a lot more classical Indian dance, classical Indian music, and that the work ranges from community level all the way up to big international touring artists. And we had a client call us out pretty hard when an event went really badly. And it's the kind of feedback that sticks with you for a long time because they really took the time to explain all of the things that we did badly and a kind of failure at most levels. And so the team are kind of captivated by that feedback, right? And have the kind of motivation to make change, right? And so we're trying to find a way to pay someone to help with some of the training, and then also find some ways to just learn more about you know, 1 billion people and a very diverse cultural landscape, but that are showing up at the Shankman Arts Center with, you know, almost 20 shows a year now. And it's coming, there's just a lot of friction points, you know, like we have ushers who don't want to support a 4-hour show, you know, and we've twice now had the feedback that we haven't greeted a client properly when they arrive at the theater. And like, we don't greet anybody properly when they arrive at the theater. We just say, hey, here's the door, come on in, you know? So there's quite a lot of learning that needs to happen. And we're trying to just do that in a way that doesn't put the burden on the people who've obviously complained about our services, but like builds, because this is really, Terry, you weren't in that big thing with Paquet and Feldman, but you know, they're not that interested in working with us, right? And so like, these are where our clients are coming from in the next 5-10 years. And like, we really need to do a lot better and build much better relationships with a whole variety of promoters in the South Asian community.
Yeah. Yeah. And much to Steve's, you know, thing, ask the questions, be uncomfortable and ask, how should I greet you? You know, your statement about, you know, just open the doors and say, come on in. Well, that's very inappropriate across many cultures. And so recognizing that even something that seems very, you know, mundane, simple, or just actually being inclusive is not, it's not appropriate. And, you know, even I learned that when I was engaging with an Indigenous artist from BC. Part of their culture was entirely about being greeted in a very protocol way as a new person to their space. And I couldn't just show up like this and go, okay, you know, hey, you know, I'm here and just wanted to chat, have coffee, you know, you can't, I couldn't do that. And that colleague was drastically upset that I assumed I could.
Yeah. Yeah.
Got some, and right from when I first started touring back in the old days, there wasn't even anybody to come and open the door when you arrived at the facility. So we creeping along, but it's creeping. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Joanne, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to play a bit. Can I play a bit of devil's advocate? Because,
Always.
and I'm not too sure if I believe in what I'm saying, but I'm just saying it out loud. Again, hoping it's a safe space. But if there's a group that has, like you were just talking about, has a completely different protocol or way of engagement when you're entering a building or whatever it could be. Could it also be a slight onus on that group to share that information in advance? Because it's a, I think it needs, I'm not, it's up to the individual to learn as well about a diverse groups, but there's a lot of diverse groups.
Mhm.
And maybe is there a way of both kind of coming together and, you know, rather than you having, you know, would it have been appropriate for that group that you were talking about to just, you know, have a little, hey, this is how we do things. Would it be okay if we work together? Like, I don't know how to say that, but do you know
Well,
what I mean? Kind of.
absolutely. And I'm not, you know, I'm not saying that that wouldn't have been appropriate, because I'm just going to stop at the initial reaction, because there's more to the story. But anyway,
Yeah.
the initial reaction, because you're absolutely right. But the reality of it was, you know, even though I'm also someone who's Indigenous, I'm going into somebody else's space. And so starting that conversation was important, but both of us being racialized, yeah, there's a way more to the conversation than necessary here. Part of the dominant community in the sense of, you know, the Shankman and the city of Ottawa, it's due diligence that if you are bringing in a community group or individual that you recognize is not necessary, like, well, and just like Asif said, you know, one person does not represent all of the Sikh community or all of the Muslim community. Everyone and every person has very different aspects to their own cultural identity. You know, for me, someone with a Six Nations background, you know, Haudenosaunee background, I'm very different from Anishinaabe people. So very different. So I mean, you know, what you do for one, you shouldn't be doing for the other. I need to ask. So glad you're coming, you know, that you've agreed to come. How can we honor you appropriately from the moment you get to our doors? You know, it's a simple question, and it's humility. It's all coming down to humility. And then, yes, the onus is on that other party to tell you honestly. And the key is to be, you know, again, as the dominant person in the hierarchical structure of the relationship versus someone who's been marginalized. It does come down to he said, she said, in many circumstances where, you know, something didn't get done, and you'll think back going, well, last, it didn't get done. We've now had that person complain because it didn't get done. So now you've been given a trigger for the next time. So, you know, so how can I make your, you know, make your stay or make your welcome, or, you know, greet you in a way that's appropriate from the moment you walk in the door to now knowing, and what do I need to have in your dressing room, and how do I set up your dressing room? Like, because that now you didn't know that because the first person didn't tell you, but now you know that perhaps that is something that I need to ask about the second time. So hence it's an ongoing learning process of two-way communication. I totally agree, the onus on a relationship building process that everybody's responsible for, but it might not always happen, and therefore the person who still takes up that dominant space in the hierarchy of race and all of the aspects of racism needs to be humble enough to still come, you know, still do the work and come back and the next time better, because that's the only way anybody's going to learn.
Yeah.
Again, my 2 cents.
Yeah, I would just add that you know, a lot of our work we do in partnership, and so sometimes it's usually that we're not just hiring artists, because when we're hiring artists, it's a little bit easier to have those protocol conversations. It's a deeper relationship, it's a longer relationship. But most of our work is with rental clients. And that's like often a more transactional relationship. But I would say that increasingly, I'm trying to get people to think about those rental clients in the same way as partnership and relationship building. Because what happens is that if we don't ask better questions and think more about how different people may need different things in our space, then like for me in a partnership, both parts have to kind of bend towards the middle a little bit. And that works much better on a second date or a third date than the first date, you know? And for us, the first date is often the first show we do together. And if people feel disrespected or feel like, we haven't taken the time to understand the content of the show, then it can just turn immediately. And there's no moment to like grow together. It's just like moving in absolutely opposite directions. And we end up with a lot of like first time clients who never come back, because they just don't think the space is for them.
One person that would be great to sort of have on in this work that you're doing, Terry, is Kevin Wong. Because he's done a lot of study and work on how you bring people into space, like particularly like he's an artist, so and he originally was calling it radical hospitality, but now he's sort of shaping it around that there has to be an element of benevolence through the whole thing. But he's quite brilliant on how that works, and it might not be in this form, and it could be in another OP form, but because everybody's struggling with it. It's not just you guys in Ottawa. It's it's even if you're just even a small space, and it's on both sides too, right? There's the host, so like understanding the role of the host, but then there's the guest. or and those, like in lots of cultures, being the host has a lot more than that does in the Western world, a lot more onus on how you treat the guest.
Mhm.
So I think there's lots we still need to learn. But there could be radically transforming of our spaces too, is
Yeah,
Is-
absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, yeah, I could certainly, and I would appreciate actually having maybe a chance that I talk to Kevin as part of a Cedar tea break,
Yeah.
and ask him questions about his approach to working in the spaces he does, and how he has negotiated all of those ways of building relationships or
Yeah.
yeah, that's great. That's a great idea. Thanks, Jane. Well, I think it's food for thought, which is what I always hope these sessions will do, and just get people thinking about them in different ways, and then come back in 2 weeks and continue the conversation.
Right. Well, have a good Monday, September 30th, everybody. Okay.
Indeed, wear your orange. Okay.
Thanks
Thanks
so
for
much,
coming.
Jerry.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.